Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are several weeks into the 2027 to 2028 offseason. The winter meetings just ended. We've got a lot of work to do this offseason to improve our Buffalo Wings, who were seventh place in the National League East last year in our second season in Major League Baseball. And we have made a few moves thus far in free agency to hopefully start the improvements of the team. And actually, our improvements haven't really been made in free agency. They've been made actually more through the trade market. Brought on Devin Williams to become our closer. Brought on Emerson Talavera to hopefully become an important relief pitcher for us. Kyle Backus to be hopefully a solid left-handed reliever for us to improve our pitching staff. And then we made a big trade for Sean Murphy, excellent defensive catcher. Made a trade for Bo Bichette to take over as our second baseman, probably only for this upcoming season. And most importantly, we recently made a trade for Marcelo Meyer, who hopefully will become our shortstop of the future. He's making $15.2 million this year. We had to give up one of the top prospects in our system, as well as our former starting catcher Jonah Heim to bring him on board. Hence why we made the trade for Sean Murphy. You can see that Meyer's arbitration estimate for next season is $20 million. We also have had initial discussions with him about a contract extension. He's looking for about $5 million more than his expected arbitration number, just to sign for 1 year. And if we try signing him for a longer term deal, wants $38 million a year for over 7 years. So he is clearly going to be extremely expensive for us to lock up. I think honestly, it makes more sense to do it after this upcoming season, when he's likely to be making somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million as an arbitration eligible player next year. That hopefully will be the time when we can get him signed to a long-term deal. Depending on what our financial situation looks like, we may be able to give him something somewhat front-loaded. But clearly with his very good defense and his very good bat, that over the course of his career has provided a 115 OPS plus and a 117 WRC plus at the major league level. Expect him to hopefully be an important part of our team for many years to come. But with those moves and certainly bringing on both Meyer and Murphy did spend some money. We've still got a ton of money available to spend. Now, we have cut our scouting and development budgets pretty materially from last year and would like to potentially get those higher, so we might not have as much money to spend as it seems right now. But clearly, we can try to make a big mark in the free agent market. We had been in negotiations with Dylan Carlson, believed he was probably the most versatile bat available in free agency this year. But he is now looking for $31 million a year for 4 years, given that he's going to be turning 30 after this upcoming season, and he's a good to very good bat, but I don't think there's any argument for him being a great bat. I agree with the preponderance of those of you who have opined on this in the comment section since our last episode, who think that he either wouldn't have gone for Carlson to begin with, or you would drop out now because he's gotten too expensive. And I do tend to agree with that. So I think we're going to move on. If he comes back to us 3 weeks from now and says, hey, nobody signed me, I'm willing to be more reasonable, we'd certainly re-engage with him. We do have offers out to right fielder Trey Fletcher, left-handed pitcher Adrian Morjan, and center fielder Lang Choi, as well as first baseman Takao Ota. So some interesting players with either minor league contracts, minor league contracts with major league options and or a true major league contract in the case of Morjan. But I don't think we're going to go crazy in free agency right now. The one guy who I do have my eye on a little bit, and there's obviously no real frontline starting pitchers available right now, but the one that I'm most interested in is Clark Schmidt, the former Yankee. He was in Pittsburgh last year, 6-7, with a 2.89 ERA over 118 and a third innings pitched over 23 starts. Still looks like he could be a solid fourth or fifth starter. The issue is that he's looking for over $12 million a year right now. I don't think he's a $12 million pitcher, but my hope is that perhaps he lingers on the free agent market for another several weeks, and maybe we're able to get him at a somewhat better deal than we could today. And there are a ton of other guys who are available as free agents right now who could conceivably end up helping us as a fourth or fifth starter. Right now, I feel with Ohtani, Painter, and Bieber, we are pretty well set with our top three. Sean Sullivan in his rookie year 2 years ago was pretty good, but he was brutal this past year. Brandon Williamson was pretty good as our fifth starter this past season. But if we bring on a guy who's a little more established as a fourth or fifth starter and we move one of those guys to the pen, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world for our team. So that's kind of the high-level plan right now. We're only a little over a week away from the Rule 5 draft. International free agent signing period is going to begin in January. So probably going to tackle both of those things in this episode and then see if anything emerges as far as perhaps other guys lingering on the free agent market and perhaps being interesting. And we do have a trade outstanding that would also help us in terms of our starting rotation. We should be hearing back from, I believe it's the Blue Jays that trade offer is with in the next day or two, and I'll talk about it with you then. And we have heard back from the Blue Jays on that trade proposal. And we're almost there, but the almost there involves us giving up either an important major league player or one of the top prospects in our system, in addition to what we've already offered. We've offered 19-year-old center fielder Chrysler Cohen, not a real big-time prospect at this point. Happy to include him. Minor league right-handed pitcher Jose Ailman, who is a guy we signed right at the start of this playthrough. He's been coming up through our minor league system. Doesn't look like he's going to be a big-time major league pitcher. He's never made it above high A ball at this point. So happy to include him. And then third baseman Jordan Westberg, who's been our starting third baseman each of the past 2 years. And he's been pretty consistent over those 2 seasons. Looks like a guy who's going to hit 260, 15 to 25 home runs, 35 to 40 doubles, decent offensive player, okay-ish glove for a third baseman. Would love a little bit more range and a little bit more of an arm, but he's competent there. But my thought is for this upcoming season, with the fact that we still have Kevin Made in our system, who's kind of our super utility guy at this point, because Bo Bichette is probably our second baseman, Deshaun Seifu is probably our third baseman, and Marcelo Meyer is obviously our shortstop. Westberg is a little bit of a luxury for us at this point. Clearly, we would certainly have him at the very least starting against left-handed pitching in some role, whether it's at third base or DH if he's still on the team. But feel like he's potentially expendable. And we can get the 27-year-old right-handed pitcher Hayden Junger from the Blue Jays, who has split the last 2 years between the starting rotation and the bullpen for the Blue Jays. 3-10 with 21 saves a season ago, 3.95 ERA. This year he was 2-13 with 1 save, but still put up a 3.81 ERA. And his Sierras of 2.73 and 3.45 are more than respectable. So is he a superstar pitcher? No. But he's a guy with a solid three pitch arsenal, excellent fastball and slider, and a above average changeup. So his stuff, movement, his control are all a little bit above average. He is a fly ball pitcher with movement just a little bit above average, so probably going to give up some dingers. He's given up 20 and about 200 plus innings over the last couple years. The reason I think we can get him is that the Blue Jays have signed him to a 4-year contract at somewhat, I don't want to say ridiculous money for what he is, but very high money for what he is. 13 million this coming year, 16 and a half, and then 22 for each of the last 2 seasons. So at that money, we would never touch him, but they apparently just want to try to get out from this contract. And we've got them to potentially retain 60% of the contract. So for what we're giving up right now, I think I'd happily bring him on board. The issue is that the kind of guys they're looking for are Made, who would be expendable if we kept Westberg, but I don't think we get rid of both of them. Samuel Basallo, one of the top hitting prospects in our system. Jace Barofin, probably the best, most well-rounded hitter on our lineup, at least in terms of a little bit of power. Nick York, who I think is going to have a big role for us this year. And then a few prospects. So I feel like bringing Junger on board, if we can get the Blue Jays to keep most of his money, is not a bad addition for a guy who could definitely be the 4th starter on our team. You could argue maybe he's even the 3rd starter. Would really help change our rotation. And again, Cohen and Ailman aren't huge prospects, and Westberg is a little bit of a luxury, or if I want to be a little more offensive in my language, a little bit redundant now with the fact that we brought Bichette and Meyer on board since the end of the season. So it's just a matter of figuring out how much else we're willing to give up in terms of talent to potentially bring Junger on board. And if we did that, then there's probably no reason to wait around for Clark Schmidt unless, he's sitting around 3 months from now and looking for 3 or 4 million a year. Then we'd certainly bring him out at that point. But I don't think that is a likely scenario. And I think I'm going to be willing to put the 19-year-old reliever Tim Penfold in the deal. He's a guy who we picked 5th in 2026, 5th round in 2026, not 5th overall. He was one of the top reliever prospects in the draft. Obviously, he didn't go right near the top. 5th round, we felt he was a decent value. He spent 2 years in rookie ball, hasn't been particularly good. Obviously, despite his stamina, with the fact he's at best a 2-pitch guy, he's not a prospect as a starter. So I think he's a pretty generic right-handed relief prospect. So we are actually willing to put Penfold in the deal, and we could get it done right now, but we're going to see if we can get them to hold on to another 10% of Junger's contract. Try to make this as cost effective as possible for Buffalo. So we'll submit that to the Blue Jays and see what they have to say. Oof, they said no way. So we've got to add in somebody really big to get them to do the 70%. So it's clearly a salary dump. Add in Penfold and see if 65. What do you guys think of that? Huh? Sounds like that might have a little bit more chance, but they could still come back and want a huge prospect for an extra 5% on his contract, in which case I think we'll do the deal the way that they proposed. And it looks like we can get the deal done with them keeping 65% of his contract. Obviously, they want some huge names in there with the likes of our starting center fielder, Miguel Blaise. But one guy that they'll also accept is a 20-year-old right fielder, Gilberto Angulo, who certainly does not look like a big-time prospect. He's hit 200 and 220 in rookie ball. Was a scouting discovery a few years ago. Not a big-time prospect. We'll happily add him in. So we're losing our former starting third baseman in Westberg, who's still reasonably cost-effective at $1.6 million, and certainly a player who, with 3.6 and 2.6 WARs the last 2 years, delivers pretty good value. His ARB number even next year is only expected to be $3 million. I don't love giving him up, but again, at this point, with Bichette, Meyer, and Seifu at second, short, and third this upcoming season, plus the fact that we still have Made on the roster, as well as Jones as a potential utility infielder, and we want to keep Jones because he's the only captain personality that we have at the major league level at this point. Westberg is a bit, as I said, redundant, and Penfold, I think, could be a decent major league reliever. Cohen, Ailman, lottery tickets, and Angulo is a lottery ticket that is extremely unlikely to strike. And to get a 27-year-old pitcher in Hayden Junger, who over the course of his major league career has put up a 116 ERA plus, a 74 FIP minus. He's only started 27 games. So the Blue Jays have viewed him more as a reliever than a starter. And certainly with that 40 stamina, the hope is that he kind of follows what we saw with Shane Bieber last year and becomes a 5-inning pitcher for us. And all Bieber did after we signed him as a free agent was lead the National League in ERA as a 5-inning pitcher. Not suggesting that Junger's going to do that for us, but I think he can be a pretty productive 5-inning starter. And with the Blue Jays in a situation where they'll be keeping 65% of his contract, even in the third and fourth seasons of this upcoming contract, we're going to be on the hook for less than $8 million a year. If I did my math properly quickly in my head. So he's not going to be happy that he's not the closer anymore, but I think he's potentially a pretty good value as a fourth starter. As I said, maybe he's our third starter, maybe he's our fourth starter, maybe he even ends up as our fifth starter, but he's a guy that we've got control for, who's signed for the next 4 seasons, and we're not really giving up anybody who is a big-time part of our future at this point. I guess we could certainly argue that if we don't get Meyer signed to an extension and we move on from Bichette after this season, which is very possible, Westberg would have a role for us in the future. But we're obviously not going to pick up a 27-year-old potential good starting pitcher for nothing. So I think we're going to add Gilberto Angulo into the deal and say goodbye to Cone, Ailman, Westberg, Penfold, and Angulo, and welcome our new fourth starter, Hayden Junger, to the team. Fans pleased to have him on board, so that pushes our fan interest up a point to 100. And I think Junger should be right into the rotation as a fourth starter. We will see, or as I said, maybe even a third starter. We'll see what our bench coach suggests, not that we're necessarily going to go with it. And he sees Junger being a follower. I don't know that I'm going to do that, but we can worry about that in spring training. But at least he does see Junger as a member of the rotation like I do. So I think, obviously, if Clark Schmidt is still available 3 months from now and he's really cheap, we'll potentially consider bringing him on board. But we've definitely added a guy who I think can help our rotation now, in addition to the work that we've done in the bullpen and the work that we've done as far as our everyday players, as we try to ensure that this team improves from being 11th in the National League in offense and 11th in the National League in pitching, which is where we were last year. And we've simmed ahead about another week, made it to the Rule 5 draft. Still haven't heard back from any of those free agents that we've made offers to. Certainly would love to round out the depth on our team by bringing on at least a couple of those guys, the handful of players that we have offers out on. Should hear about them soon. Right now, you can see we're picking 7th in the Rule 5 draft. Let's go ahead and see who's available. Taking a look at all the pitchers. Some guys with decent potential out there. Decent number of 3-star potential guys. So certainly some people to look at, particularly 23-year-old Juan Amarante. A little less interesting than I thought with that horrible movement and extreme fly ball tendencies. He did give up a rather sickly 13 home runs in 69 and a third innings with Boston last year, so it does make sense that he's out there when I look a little closer. Taking a look at the top batters available, only 3-star potential guys. A lot of guys who are kind of 2.5-star players at this point in their career. So I'm going to spend a little time digging into all of these. See what our scouting director recommends. He says we go with the switch-hitting catcher Nelson Quiroz. He's kind of meh defensively, meh-ish at best offensively. If he has hit, 336 and 325 the last 2 years in AAA, after hitting 285 in AAA the year before that, so a very productive AAA offensive player, but I don't see a guy who's got any real shot at making our 26-man roster in him. So hopefully there will be somebody more interesting, and that's what I'm going to try to figure out. And there's actually a few interesting players. I think we're going to go with a pitcher here in the first round. Phil Bickford certainly has a decent profile, one of the better profiles of anyone available, but don't love the fragility, don't love the selfish attitude and the negative personality traits, and also don't love that he's making $5 million. So he's not the answer. Tyler McGill, who we traded away just over a month ago because he asked to be traded because he is a whiny baby, was 1-11 with an 8.50 ERA for us last year. I do think the contract that he's under is not all that bad a contract, but I am not going to bring big whiny baby Tyler back on our team. We wish him the best. But the guy that we are going to bring on board is Harold Melenge, 25-year-old lefty making the major league minimum. His profile is certainly respectable. When we look at what he's done at the major league level, he hasn't been great with a 93 ERA plus and a 109 FIP minus over the course of 91 and 2/3 innings with Houston, Toronto, and Texas over the last 3 years. Never really gotten a great chance, although he was up for 41 games with Texas this past year. And he had his most effective season, or one of his better seasons. I guess technically the 5 games he was with Texas in 2026 were also pretty impressive. But for a more legitimate sample size, he had 19 saves, a 2.28 ERA, strikeout per inning. I think it's worth bringing him on board as a potential lefty out of the pen. Does not throw all that hard. And looking at his ratings, he's actually better against right-handed pitchers than he is against lefties. So no guarantees that he's even going to make the team, but I think he's a decent guy to at least bring on board. So we're going to go ahead and draft Melenge, who apparently is popular with the fans for some reason. And go back to the Rule 5 draft. We'll continue to the draft. There is a position player I would consider bringing on if he's still available. Scouting director still recommending the catcher Nelson Quiroz, who no one else has selected. that is not the direction that we want to go. And fortunately for us, the guy that we liked as far as position players is still available, and that's Victor Acosta, 23-year-old out of the Dominican, has some pretty good speed, decent defensive guy. The bat's probably not quite major league quality. Did hit 312 in 394 at bats in AAA last year after hitting 312 earlier in the season in AA. Like I said, I question if the bat's really a major league bat, but for a potential sixth infielder, he's a switch hitter. He's got some speed. He's competent defensively. I don't think there's any guarantees that he makes our team. In fact, I think he most likely will not make our team. But we're willing to bring Acosta into camp to at least see what he looks like and see what our injury situation looks like over the course of the upcoming spring training. And it looks like we were only one of only 4 teams that picked 2 players in the expansion draft. So again, I don't know that Melenge or Acosta is going to end up making the team, but a left-handed arm and a potential utility infielder, at least it gives us a little bit more depth for spring training. And if we have some injuries, or if as we scout those players out, it turns out they're a little better than we thought they were, maybe one of them's got a chance at sticking on our 26-man roster for this upcoming season. And some good news finally as the new year approaches, starting to filter in. We did get Adrian Morjan, the left-handed reliever, signed to a contract, $1.4 million with team options each of the next 2 years. I think that he could be a pretty interesting left-handed arm for us out of the bullpen. Look at what he has done at the major league level over the course of his career, and has definitely been a little bit above average. He is definitely a guy who is a little more effective with somewhat better stuff against lefties than righties. Haven't had a ton of lefty options in the bullpen the last couple years, and certainly with Morjan now on board, gives us some more options there. Takao Ota, the import from Japan, is also signed. I'll be making $1.5 million if he makes the 26-man roster. We'll get a good look at him in spring training. Don't know that he's quite ready to be a productive major league hitter, but if that contact and home run power both develop quicker than expected, or as we scout him more, are better than we think they are right now, particularly in terms of the contact, since we think he's at the 65 home run power. He could be an interesting guy who's got a chance to make our 26-man roster as well. Looking at Morjan being on board at this point, and we definitely are in a situation now where we've got a lot of potential lefty options in the bullpen. Atencio is our closer. Most of the last couple years with Devin Williams on board, Atencio not going to be in that role. Williamson or Sullivan, one of those two is likely to be in the pen. Mentioned that we brought Backus on board. We've signed Morjan now, and we just picked up Melenge in the Rule 5 draft. So we at least have some left-handed arms coming into camp, and if we want to break camp with 3 or 4 lefties in our bullpen, it looks like at least that's going to be an option this season, where we haven't necessarily even had that number of left-handed arms in camp in previous years. And the young center fielder Lang Choi out of Taiwan has asked if we're interested in resuming negotiations after he's reviewed the market. We'd be happy to bring the 21-year-old into our minor league system. So we'll offer him a minor league contract again. We've offered him minor league contracts over the past month or two, I think on 2 occasions, and they haven't worked out. But if you're coming to us hat in hand, maybe you'll agree with a minor league contract at this point. And we've noticed a few other things here as we've continued kind of scouting out some of the minor league or international amateur free agents. Perhaps one of the more unfortunate names we've seen for an international amateur free agent, but Violante Farto, the Venezuelan and Spanish dual citizen, somewhat unfortunately named, in my opinion. But he will be a guy that we could potentially sign as an international amateur free agent. And I also did notice that when I just looked at the transaction tab that Dylan Carlson is signed somewhere. He didn't have the kindness to tell us that we went somewhere after we didn't up the offer on him. I'm guessing I would be surprised if he got over $30 million a year. He said that's what he was looking for last time he checked with us. Looks like he signed with the Angels. Wow. Okay, so it's front loaded. Actually, it's the contract offer. It's the last contract offer we made to him. He came back to us and said that he wanted an average of over $31 million a season for 4 years. But the last deal that we had made to him was exactly this: 4 years, 108, front loaded at 36, followed by 24, 24, 24. So we made that offer to him. Apparently he preferred it from the Angels, and apparently he was really trying to trick us when he said he needed $31 million a year to sign with us. So I can't say that we wish Dylan Carlson good luck, because he's kind of a weaselly little character, but it is what it is at this point. I still think we've improved our team pretty materially thus far in the offseason. We've still got a lot of time to go. And I mentioned earlier in the episode that Meyer was looking for some really big money to sign to an extension. Couple other guys that we brought on this year, Bo Bichette and Devin Williams. Bichette looking for $16 million a year for 4 years. Although I think he can help us this year, I don't know that I want to make a long-term commitment to him. Devin Williams, similarly, looking for even a little more, $17 million over 4 years. Given that he's going to be turning 34 by the end of next season, not a commitment I'm willing to make right now. We can see what those guys do for us this year, but I don't know that either of them are in our long-term plans. But certainly would love to get ourselves in a position where a year from now we've got Marcelo Meyer locked up for an extended period of time, joining Ohtani and Painter as the only guys with real long-term deals. I guess Hayden Junger is kind of in that mix right now. And then obviously we've got a lot of guys who we control through league minimums and arbitration for several more seasons. So we haven't spent a ton of money this off season. I am going to at least put a little more back into scouting and player development for the time being, just so I don't forget to do it. Clearly, that still leaves us with plenty of money if we want to approach anything in the trade or in the free agent market. Taking a look at the all players who are available. Reese McGuire, catcher, which we don't really need, is the top player out there. He is a captain personality, which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but don't see him with that bat being an upgrade from Sean Murphy. In fact, I'd argue he's not as good as Sean Murphy. Taking a look at the starting pitchers who are still available, and it does look like Clark Schmidt is still out there, looking for $11.7 million, so still way more expensive than we want to spend, particularly since we got the trade done to bring Junger on board already. Still waiting to hear from Fletcher and Kim, who allegedly prefer our offers, as well as the minor league offer that we made to Choi. And I'd say there's absolutely no reason for us to go after Clark Schmidt right now unless his demand comes down by about 8 million plus, because we did sign Ji-Hoo Kim, 32-year-old out of South Korea. Looks like he could be a fifth starter. We've got him signed to a minor league contract with a $1.4 million price. If he ends up making the team, he can opt out, but gives us another arm in the mix for the back end of our rotation and maybe potentially a spot in our bullpen. So feel like we are just throwing a bunch of spaghetti against a wall with some of these guys and trying to see what they look like in spring training. Just got an offer from the Orioles for the young outfielder Eric Pena, who had a pretty nice year for us, 272, 21 homers, and 452 at-bats. They're offering us the left-handed pitcher Jaden Woods. He was 6-7 with a save, 5.16 ERA. Not a horrible profile, although that poor movement and extreme fly ball tendencies concerns me. And he did give up 20 home runs among his 117 hits in less than 100 innings pitched. So our assistant GM says he thinks we'd regret it if we didn't make this deal. I think I'd regret it if I did make that deal, so I am not going to pull the trigger on that one. We are going to keep Eric Pena around, at least for the near term. And we've made it to the start of the international amateur free agent signing period. This isn't something that I've spent much time on in the last episode or two. Obviously, I've been scouting the players and bringing them into camp, but really haven't looked at it on a video since the players were first announced back in October. And it was not an impressive looking class at that point. And my assessment at that point agreed with some of the comments that were out there, that this might be a year to just try to bring on 4, 5, 6, 7 guys and just hope that we hit a lottery ticket with one of them, because the guys who were likely going to be getting the big money were not necessarily all that impressive. And I think that's still the general assessment. Clearly, when you look at the pitchers who are available, there is not a lot out there, according to our scout. Mauricio Morales kind of stands out in terms of the ability, but also is a guy with poor work ethic, poor intelligence, just not a lot to consider in the list of starting pitchers who are available. And we actually haven't even, didn't bring in any pitchers to the final 10 guys that we brought into camp. It was all batters that we brought in for the final guys into camp. And we'll take a look at all of them right now before deciding which direction we're going to head in terms of spending the $4.75 million that we've got available this year. And there is, according to our scout, 4 5-star potential players available. They're all 16-year-olds. But as we dig into them deeper, they all have some issues. Juan Ayala, first baseman, like the durability, certainly looks like he could be an interesting bat. But he's got a low work ethic, and he's about the worst prospect I've ever seen in terms of the speed, bunting, defensive ability combination. He is a pure designated hitter. If that bat fully develops, he could be an interesting major league hitter, left-handed bat, durable player. But that low work ethic gives me concern that he's ever really going to develop. Humberto Duque, another first baseman. He is more interesting to me at this point. The bat is potentially outstanding. He's also durable. He's also a guy without a lot of speed and without a lot of defensive ability, but he's a little better, and at least he doesn't have the low work ethic. So to me, he's probably the most interesting of the prospects out there, but you haven't gotten to see them all yet, so that's a bit unfair of me to say. Sergio Morez, out of the Dominican, another guy who I really like as a hitting prospect. Not durable, does have low leadership, but a switch hitter and at least a competent corner outfielder, although he doesn't have a lot of speed or bunting ability either. We've got a better relationship with Duque than we do with Merez, but both of those guys are interesting. Third baseman Luis Trocado out of Venezuela. Another guy with a potential interesting-ish bat, high intelligence, defensively. He's got the arm of a third baseman, but everything else about him suggests he should be playing first base or DH. Jorge Meza is a catcher, 17-year-old out of the Dominican. Decent prospect, not particularly exciting, but could be a little above average defensively with a little bit of pop in the bat. So he's someone that if he wasn't looking for more money than just about anybody out there would be a little more interesting to us. Jesus Betancourt, first baseman out of Venezuela, low work ethic, brutal defensively, not as strong a potential bat as some of the other guys we've seen. A guy that we're not even bringing into camp anymore was Rodolfo Capistran. Good personality, but just not all that excited about the bat with him or the defense. Alfredo Guerrero is a shortstop. Like the personality, a little more defensive ability and speed than some of the other guys we've looked at, and also has a bat that, if fully developed, could be potentially interesting. Not looking for a ton of money. We don't have a great relationship with him. Julio Miramontes, another shortstop. Another guy, if he fully develops, the bat is interesting. Like the durability. He's got decent range, not too much else to offer defensively, but another guy who we could at least consider. Frank Saliandia is a guy that we had into camp a couple of times, but we just decided to move on from bringing in the last time with that low work ethic and low intelligence. Just not the type of guy that we're going to throw some money at. So we ended up bringing in some less regarded prospects the last time in camp. Juan Levano out of Venezuela. Like the leadership, love the arm. Don't know that he's ever really going to have a major league bat. But he's also not looking for a lot of money. So a guy that if we have a little bit of money left over and he's still on the market, maybe we bring him in. And then Julio Romero, a center fielder, another guy. We like the work ethic, like the speed. If he completely develops, the bat is borderline interesting, has a little bit of range. Again, not the greatest prospect in the world, but another guy that we might be able to get at a decent kind of price. So I feel like the top end hitting prospects are not great, but I do kind of feel like as we got to scout a lot of these players better over the last few months, the class of international amateur free agents, at least in terms of the offensive players, isn't as bad as I kind of initially thought it was when we had less extensive scouting reports on a lot of these players. And although I'm not thrilled with this overall class, I am going to pivot from what I thought I would be doing when I first met this class, which was just kind of spraying all over and hoping to hit on somebody. If Humberto Duque completely develops, and obviously there's no guarantees that he completely develops, but if he completely develops, he is a potentially devastating offensive force. He's durable. He's a DH, maybe a first baseman. Can't even play him at corner or outfield. But I know there's probably only a 10 to 20% chance that bat develops. But if that bat develops, he's a pretty special player. So I'm actually going to make an offer to Duque right now. And I'm not going to make offers to anyone else because I think if I could spend every penny we had and it would guarantee me that I got Duque, I think that's the direction I want to go. If you've got thoughts on this, please share them in the comments down below, because there's no guarantees that I'm going to get Duque signed for a small amount or a big amount. But we are going to make him an initial offer of 1.75 million, so more than he's looking for at the 1.4 million. Submit that offer to him. I don't think he's going to sign for that amount. Obviously, if he does sign for that amount and we're able to get the guy that we think is the most interesting international amateur free agent this year, and then still have $3 million to potentially throw at a few of these other guys that I've talked about, that's the best case scenario. But we've got very high scouting accuracy on him. We've got a pretty good scout who's highly favored tools. Again, with an international amateur free agent, a 16-year-old, how many of these guys develop to anywhere close to their full potential? It's a percentage well below 50 and probably well below 25. But go with the guy with the highest ceiling, and I think it's Duque as far as the bat in this class. So that's going to be the guy that we push a good chunk of our chips in on initially. And if he says he wants us to push in more chips on him in the coming weeks, we probably will. And with the offer for Duque out there, let me know what you think about the international amateur free agent class. Would you have done something different, or would you kind of focus on Duque like we did? Choi has come back to us. We offered him that minor league contract. I think we've offered him a minor league contract 3 times. Says he wants more dollars now. Minor league contract with an optional signing bonus. All right. We'll give you $10,000. See what he thinks about that to get him into our organization. Don't think he's a big-time potential player, but happy to bring him on board. And then we're still waiting to hear on Trey Fletcher. This is a guy who looks like he could be a somewhat interesting bat. Would not mind having him in camp with us. We've made a minor league offer to him. He says he favors it, but he's been saying that for a while. As far as the rest of the batters who are available, not a ton out there that really interests us on the free agent market. If we were going to do something, it could be a catcher. Obviously, with Murphy, who we traded for not that long ago, he is the starter next year with that excellent ability and defensive arm, above average home run power, coming off of a year when he hit just a $189, and you can see his batting average has been dropping rather precipitously over the past few seasons. But he's there mostly for his glove. He's going to be our starter in almost any scenario. As we've talked about in previous episodes, my plan right now would be to have Samuel Basallo, who's a catcher slash first baseman. He's 45 defensively catcher, but has a pretty good arm. Not a perfect backup. Would typically like my backup to have a better glove. But this is a guy who has a potentially pretty interesting bat. He's 23 years old, a guy that we picked up in the expansion draft. And he did combine for 34 homers between AA and AAA last year. So right now, Basallo is penciled in as our backup catcher, but catcher is probably the position where there are the most interesting players out there at this point on the market. Salvador Perez, I know some of you have commented on him before, and his request is down to $4.2 million. Gives us a captain personality, still above average defensively. Just don't love the bat at this point. Although with 279 average and 17 home runs last year for Houston, he was certainly a heck of a lot more productive than Murphy was. But I'm a little more intrigued by Joey Bart, potentially, another captain personality, another decent defensive catcher with a little bit of a bat, looking for not a ton of money, and he's materially younger than Perez. And then last but not least, there's Pablo Aliendo, who's the best defensively of the bunch. Good in the clubhouse, although he's not a captain personality. The bat is not great. He's been with Nashville the last couple years, hit a .184 and 207. Looks largely as a backup catcher. But I think that any of those guys could be interesting to bring on board as a potential backup. Gives us better defense from our backup catcher, and Vasallo still could make the team, is a third catcher slash first base slash DH kind of guy, or he could also get a little more seasoning down in AAA and be there as kind of an insurance policy if we have some injuries. So if you've got thoughts on what we should think about with these now reasonably economical catcher options, would love to hear those. And then pitching wise, I don't feel like we've got to do a ton at this point. Yency Almonte, just when you look at the stuff, movement, control, above average, and all of those, is probably the most interesting guy that's out there. But we've added a fair amount of talent to our pitching staff this year. Already in the offseason. Looking at the starters, Clark Schmidt's still out there, but his demand keeps going up, which is a little odd for a guy here in mid-January. Still a guy that I would think about, and there's Jordan Montgomery, there's Casey Mize, Bryce Elder, Zach Eflin, Chris Bassett. There's guys out there who could be a fifth starter for us. I just don't know, with the fact that we've still got Sullivan and Williamson in the mix to be a fifth starter for us. And then we also recently signed the Japanese pitcher, Ji-Hoo Kim, to the minor league contract with a major league option. Just don't feel like we really need to stress out about that fifth starter spot right now. I feel like there's a fair amount of options that we've got available to us. So if you've got thoughts on what, if anything, we should do in free agency, what our approach should be in international amateur free agency, if there's a hole on the team that I haven't thought of that we really need to focus on filling over these last couple months of the off season, let me know what you're thinking. But I feel like we've made some modest progress in this episode and some consistent progress in the last few episodes in terms of free agency and trades and trying to make this team more competitive for the upcoming 2028 season. But even more importantly, hopefully putting a team together that can be competitive for many years to come. And we'll find out what type of progress we make towards that in our coming episodes. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.